Hi, good evening, everyone. It's just about 7. So it is 7 now. Welcome, everybody. This is a workshop that the Southwick Agricultural Commission is co-sponsoring with the very gracious help of the Mass Department of Agricultural Resources. And we have EPR as well. And not an official AgCom meeting in the sense that we'll be taking votes for having a quorum. It's a meeting that was scheduled with an agenda for the purposes of the town being aware of the meeting, but it will be a meeting that is not voted on, so we don't need to take a quorum. Let me see here. I believe we have everybody on that will be presenting tonight. I'm just bringing up the agenda here so I can do quick introductions. Record the meeting. It is being recorded as well. So not an official AgCom meeting in the traditional sense. It's still going to be posted, being recorded to the town website so we can look back to it for future reference. Let's see here. I think is Jacob here?
So Jacob couldn't find the link, so I just sent him the agenda. So hopefully he can get on soon.
Okay, all right. So we'll wait a moment for Jacob to join because he's one of our speakers. But I just want to make sure in terms of housekeeping. Sorry, Bert.
Yeah, in the chat, Diane Gale is asking if she can record it too. Oh, never mind. Never mind. Sorry.
So I did just a housekeeping thing in terms of the meeting moderator. I think that would be Cindy, right? Cindy Barton, who's our new secretary for AgCom. So Cindy, I believe, would be able to hold the presentation on her screen, or can she give screen sharing abilities to Tina? Because I know Tina has the final PowerPoint presentation that was just edited.
Yeah, sorry. I added another slide.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. I'm glad that you could make it full of good information. So Cindy, if you can hear me, do you know if you can give Tina Smith the screen sharing permission so that she can kind of run the presentation with Jacob?
Yep, I can try and do that. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay.
Is she not able to, or?
Oh, I guess I can. Oh no, host disabled, participant screen sharing.
Okay, I'll try and fix that for them.
Okay. So whilst we're doing that, I'll just do a quick introduction. So yeah, as I mentioned, AgCom is co-sponsoring this, and we have a couple AgCom members here tonight. We have our chair, Bert Hansen. We have Sage Fury. We have Dennis Clark. I'm on the AgCom as well. My name is Marisa Cook Obregon, and our guests tonight, who are really chuffed to have, are Tina Smith from the Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources, and then we also have Jacob Macko. I hope I'm not butchering your last name. Okay, well, thank you so much to both of you for being here, and they'll be leading the presentation tonight on chapter 61. So without further ado, if the screen sharing abilities have been given to Tina, I think I'll let Tina take over from here and have her and Jacob figure out how to divvy up that presentation that they have for us. And then I'm sorry, Sue Gore will also, I'm sorry, so I didn't mean to leave you out. Sue Gore, our town assessor, is on the line as well. And there's some slides in this presentation that Sue will speak to, and hopefully we'll have time to do a little bit of a Q&A at the end. But without further ado, our three guests will take over. Thank you, guys.
Tina, I can start.
Yeah, sorry, it was I couldn't figure out how to unmute myself. Yeah, you go ahead and get started. And then I'll pick up at the 61A bit. That'd be great. Okay.
Again, my name is Jacob Macko. I am the Mass Department of Conservation and Recreation Service Forester. Service Forestry administers Chapter 61 Land Use Program for Forestry, and also Chapter 132, the Timber Forest Cutting Practices Act, that allows people to harvest wood products. I'm relatively new to the job. I'm about 3 weeks in, but I do have a lot of experience from the private sector. I spent about 9 years practicing forestry in the Amherst, Belchertown area. So these programs are all very familiar to me. So Chapter 61 programs, the purpose for the landowner is to provide lower taxes compared to what they might be being taxed under Chapter 59. It makes owning land, agricultural land, open space, and forest land more affordable. It's kind of an exchange for lower taxes. You're also kind of not developing your land, but also providing public benefits that we'll go into more detail after. Again, land that isn't under 61 by default is taxed under Chapter 59, which is considered its development value. Property's value might change depending on if maybe you have commercial, maybe you're in a commercial zone with a lot of frontage, or maybe it's a lot of backland with poor or what access. That value might change depending on the type of property you have. And there's 3 different types in the Chapter 61 program. Chapter 61 is really for forest land and growing wood products. Chapter 61A is really dedicated to active agriculture and horticulture. And 61B is geared towards more passive landowners. Maybe it's open space, wildlife habitat, fields. It can also be wooded. And there's different variations of the 61B program based on the use. And we'll get into that later in the presentation. And yeah, you are allowed to change programs without any penalty. I know some landowners who were in 61 and their goals changed and they've transferred to 61B or 61A and vice versa. So you're not locked into any program when you enroll. Again, a current use tax program. When you enroll in the program, your taxes are reduced considerably based on the program that you enroll in. As a homeowner, I'm always keeping an eye on my tax bill. You know, tax rates are usually set, you know, and they're usually announced, but, you know, my valuation kind of fluctuates depending on the market. And the same goes with land, you know, that value can change. But when you're enrolled in the program, it's more predictable, the costs are much lower, and you're kind of insulated a little bit from a changing valuation. And something else is developed land does put more strain on public utilities, schools, especially water and sewer. You know, some towns are always at that cusp if they have a, you know, sewage plant, and if their population grows, sometimes they're forced to, you know, update, and, you know, it just gets more expensive. So Massachusetts is really interesting. We are the 11th most densely forested state, but we're also the third, we have the 3rd highest population density. So we have a lot of forests. We also have a lot of people living here. And the ownership use is also really interesting. Almost, you know, over almost two thirds are forest land is owned by private owners. So you have to consider the different values that, you know, each owner has in the kind of direction that their forest land might go in, whether they conserve it, they manage it, or maybe some choose to develop it rather than keep it forested. So compared to some states, like I know Alaska, 96% of Alaska is owned by, you know, state or federal government. So, you know, the future use is more predictable, but Massachusetts is really interesting in that regard. This map kind of shows current land use cover. I think it's dated 2019. So red kind of indicates developed. Different shades of red is the different densities, intensities of development. And then, the different shades of green and yellow and brown are, agriculture, and dark green is forested. And you can kind of see Southwick, it's not outlined, but the little tail on the southern border of Massachusetts, it's mostly green, it's mostly agriculture, with a little bit of development, but there's definitely, you can see there's going to be pressure, being surrounded by Westfield, West Springfield, Agawam, and then south in Connecticut, there's kind of more intensely developed properties. So there is pressure from surrounding areas. Next slide.
Yep.
So again, it's, the property tax is based on your current use, not potential value or development. And the purpose is to, encourage landowners to keep their land as open space for as long as possible. So there's different eligibility requirements for each program. So for the Chapter 61 forest land program, there is a minimum of 10 acres to enroll in the program. That's 10 acres of forested land. That includes young forest too. It doesn't have to be mature forest. I know some people who have just had their fields let go, 10 years ago, and now there's a young forest kind of emerging. That land is still eligible. We started including Christmas trees too. I know some people have a few acres of Christmas trees along with their forest land. Christmas trees now do count towards the 61 forest land program. What doesn't count, your house, garage, your yard, your driveway, really anything manicured or tied into your home does not count towards that 10 acres. But like a woods road leading to your woodlot is considered an accessory space, so that would count, just not your driveway. The second requirement is that you have a 10-year forest management plan, and that's just a document that is mostly prepared by a Massachusetts licensed forester. There's kind of standard forms online that the forester and you can fill out. It has kind of it just goes through your current forest conditions, what are your desired forest conditions, and there's we'll get into that in the next few slides, the details. There are some hard deadlines associated with this. They need to be submitted to the DCR on or before June 30th. Anything that's received after June 30th is not eligible for that year and can be counted towards the following year's plan. And sometimes there is grant funding or cost share funding available to landowners. That's something I would recommend investigating early. The earlier you apply for the funding, the better chance you have of getting it. And there are certain deadlines to apply and to have your plan submitted. It's usually prior to June 30th. But sometimes there is money to cover the cost of having a forest management plan written. So the most basic plan includes several pages. The front page is your information, your property's information, book and page number of your deed, your taxable acreage, any land use history. Sometimes the property was harvested or managed prior to you owning it. So you can list that information, and really any other notes that need to be listed on that front page. Additional pages, the next page kind of describes the forest stands, so the type of forest cover you have on your property. tree size, species, density, the soils in the stand need to be listed, and ground cover, shrub species, and just general comments on forest health. Most of the time there's always something that can be found that should be listed as a health concern. Additional information, wetland streams, potential or certified vernal pools. Additional pages include your management recommendations. You might have the goal of identifying your property boundaries. You might have the goal of creating trails or harvesting firewood for your own use. That all can be listed under your recommendations. And then more traditional forest management can be described. And it's really a plan. Nothing has to be set in stone. It can be changed relatively easily. Sometimes you go into it, with one intention, and then as time passes, your mind change and things change. So it can be changed to fit your goals. And then additional requirements are a kind of detailed property map. Bottom left, just showing your property, the boundaries, any excluded areas. So you can see they excluded a small rectangle would be a house and yard. And really any other information, stone walls, woods roads, cellar holes. There are requirements, but you can add as much information as you'd like. And then a second map is the Locus Map, which just shows your property kind of in the landscape. So it's usually set at a larger scale, just to show your property relative to surrounding land. So some requirements when you enroll in the Chapter 61 forestry program, you are stating that, you're managing your woodland for wood products. And you must practice long-term forestry. Some landowners maybe get the idea that they can kind of do more short-sighted forestry where they're just harvesting more valuable trees and leaving the less desirable. Those practices aren't allowed in this program. And the types of forestry that is long-term really depends on the conditions of your forest. There isn't a one treatment that kind of fits all forest types. And we can discuss that in in another presentation, or that's something that you can definitely go over with your forester. They'll have recommendations, that fits your goal and your forest type. And something, every landowner, has different values. Some like that, they're providing open space. Others are primarily interested in the tax savings and growing wood products. I know some people that incorporate it into their estate planning process. And some really utilize a program because it's the only way they could afford to keep the land. And I think that's really important. I think a lot of people are pushed to develop their properties because they can't afford it anymore, or someone comes along, with the best dollar, and they, go that option instead. So I do believe these programs help a lot of people afford, their land and keep it in their families for a long time. So the timeline can be a little overwhelming, but it's pretty straightforward, especially when you're working with a forester. These timelines really haven't changed at all in a long time. But I guess the first step is really try to start early in your planning process. Reach out to a forester as soon as possible. If you're trying to reach a forester now in hopes of getting a plan in before June 30th of this year, you might have a hard time finding someone available, it's best to, I think, just plan to submit next year. So plan early. Deadline is June 30th of every year. You will hopefully get the plan back approved, and then you must submit that plan to the assessor by October 1st. And that October 1st date is the same for all 3 Chapter 61 programs, 61 Forestry, A and B. So that October 1st date is really important to remember. And then your forest management plan period begins January 1st the following year. And you should start to see a reduction in your tax July 1st, and to see your first bill in October of the following year. So there is a bit of lag time. Some people think once the plan's approved and sent to the assessor, it's instantaneous, but it does take time for it to go into effect. A lot of people reach out to me first when they're planning, when they're thinking about enrolling in 61, or if they're planning a timber harvest. And I always tell them that's the best step. They're already on the right foot. You can just call or email me really anytime, and I'll give you the best guidance that I can, depending on your goals and kind of your values and kind of how you see your ownership playing out. If you have a forest health issue, I've been doing woods walks with landowners, or if you're interested in the program, if you're questioning if you're eligible or not, just give me a call and I'd love to meet you on your property, and we can take a closer look and see if you're eligible for either program. I can provide you a directory to find a licensed forester. I can't make recommendations on licensed foresters, but I can provide a directory, and you can take it from there. And I do recommend using a Massachusetts licensed forester when you're preparing your plan, and also if you decide to do a timber sale. They've been through it so many times. They have a lot of advice and a lot of wisdom in most cases to, I think, to help you reach your goals in the best way possible. There are some great resources out there. Mass Woods, it's a UMass runs Mass Woods. It is ran by funding from DCR, and they provide a lot of useful information. If you're not in the 61 program and you have your tax bill handy, you can enter in your information on a calculator they have, and they can tell you what your tax payments could be depending on the program. They do list professionals in your area, so you can enter in your zip code and it'll kind of show professionals that are working in your area. They list stumpage prices. So stumpage is the payment that a landowner receives for their wood products, and they do surveys quarterly. So people kind of submit what they've received for payment. So you can get an idea if, a price that you were given is fair compared to other people in the state. And there's also really good information on estate planning. If you wanted to think ahead and kind of have more of a say of, what happens to your property, in the future. Service forestry, it's great. It gives updates on programs. You can find all the forms, and also cost share forms will be listed on the Service Forestry website. And Mass Woods also provides really good informational pamphlets. So you can follow that link, and they have several different pamphlets on a few topics. So yeah, there's a lot of information out there for you to check out. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Jacob. So I'm going to talk about chapter 61A and 61B. So 61A, section 1 and 2 is kind of the world I live in on a day-to-day basis. I work for the stewardship part of the APR program. So we use section A and section A 1 and 2 to define what is allowed to happen on an APR, but it also, you know, happens to be the same definition used for like further on in the chapter is what is used for the tax. So I just wanted to say real quick that so these 2 points are precipitated from a conversation I had with a landowner wherein she thought you could only have an APR on your land or enroll in 61A for the tax savings, but you can do both. So that's important to know. I don't think most people make that mistake, but you know, just throwing that out there. It's important to enroll for 61A every year, and being an APR doesn't automatically enroll you into the program. Okay, so 61A agriculture. So the difference for 61A versus you know, the forestry section is that obviously the forestry bit to some extent, but also the acreage. So for 61A, you need 5 acres to meet the minimum and your house is excluded. So whatever that local zoning says your house lot is, that, you know, is taken out, and then it's 5 acres. And then for agricultural sales, you need $500 for the first 5 acres and $5 for every additional acre after that, and 50 cents for every productive forest land acre. Okay, so you have to have your land in agricultural use at least 2 years before applying. That's the same thing when you're applying to have your land into APR. So some or all of your land may be placed. You have to exclude your residents. You know, but farm structures, justifiable farm structures, buildings, barns, sheds, you know, tobacco barn, your processing shed, that's all agricultural use, and it won't be taxed at Chapter 59 rates. So forest products are considered a type of agricultural product. That sort of is like Jacob land, where you would want to talk to him about the forest management piece of that. And you know, the other interesting thing about this 61A bit is that I will just read it here: an equal amount of contiguous. And so contiguous means like all under one ownership. It's not the same as continuous, but if you have a contiguous piece of land and it's interrupted by streams or roads, that's all considered one chunk of land under this. And so an equal amount of contiguous land, an unproductive up to 50% of what you've already placed can be placed under 61A as, you know, what do they call it? Non-productive land. So that's an interesting bit. So the tax reduction for 61A, I have a slide about the Farmland Valuation Advisory Committee, I think after this one, but let's see if it is. Yes. So they meet and they decide the rates for taxes. So one thing to know, so that $500 benchmark, if you have in the last 2 years spent your time growing grapes on a property that's never been cultivated before, this chart is developed by that committee to tell the assessor, okay, it's going to take 3 years for grapes for someone to make money. It's going to take 8 years for someone to turn a profit on Christmas trees. So, you know, if you want to get your land into the program, but you're not making any money yet, but you have spent the last 2 years dedicating that land to an agricultural use, this chart will help you achieve that goal. And I have some other MDAR updates, but I'll wait till afterwards to give them to not detract from the program. But to summarize, you know, for 61A, you have to apply every year for the tax discount, minimum of 5 acres, and you got to exclude your house. And then 61B is different from forestry and ag. I think it's a really interesting classification scheme. You know, it's for people who don't, I think it's cast a pretty broad net, like a golf course, for example, counts as 61B. So it's if you have 5 or more acres that is not being developed or, you know, planned for development, then, and you don't want to manage it for forestry, but maybe there's some like walking going on the property, you know, it might be a good fit for you. And you don't have to do a forest plan, but it is also an option. And then again, your your home is excluded. You know, to note these programs, you have to dedicate 10 years to them. I'm not sure if we expressly like really drilled that down, but you have to be in the program for 10 years to get the tax benefit. And later on in the talk, Sue will talk about what happens if you want to take your land out early. An interesting thing is if you want to build a house on the property, or, you know, a relative or a spouse, or there's a definition in the legislation, but basically if an employee needs a house, you know, and their pursuit is in taking care of the land, or if you or your spouse or a kid or something needs a house, that land can be taken out of the program without penalty. It's no longer in the program, but it's you won't get a penalty as if you change the use in any other way. So open space and recreation, in addition to meeting the minimum acreage requirement, land must fit into one of two categories. So open space, which is a substantially wild or natural or open condition, or recreation. So recreation, think the Mass Audubon Sanctuary down the street, or you can go horseback riding, target shooting. The only things that aren't allowed under that is, you know, dog racing, or what else did they say? Some sort of sport that would take place in a stadium. That wouldn't be considered recreation. But, you know, if you're like riding a horse on the land, or you're boarding for equines, that would be considered recreation. So it's pretty broad. It's open space, which is, you don't necessarily have to have a forest plan. You can do that if you'd like, or recreation, which is pretty broad. So for this, it reduces the value of the taxable land by at least 75%. So it's pretty good. And then I have the rates here. So I need to move the bubble that is our faces over here. So you can see Southwick is at the bottom. This is from 2014, so this is outdated, but you can really see here the benefit to doing one of these programs. And so Chapter 59, which is you don't have your land conserved in any way under this tax. It's just 59 is the normal tax rate. So that's an example of per acre what you'd be paying. And then if you put it into 61B, you can see that's a little higher than 61A, 61 or 61A. So if you do think you want to go the 61B route, you might want to wonder like, could I do Chapter 61 and manage the forest a little more? Or is 61B really the best fit for me? So that's an example of those rates. And then this is kind of, we're getting into Sue territory. So Sue, can we hand it over to you now? I don't know if Sue is around. I heard something in the chat, but I can't really see the chat while I'm in the presentation mode. I can run through this, but this was the part that I think Sue was gonna do. But how is my tax rate calculated? So this is from the Farmland Valuation Advisory Committee. This is updated on a regular basis. This is for fiscal year 2023. You can see the tax rates. Sue said that Southwick uses the average rating, which is the one in the middle. So the use code, that's an assessor thing. But then, so Southwick, according to Sue, does not rate their taxes based on soil ratings. So I guess we don't need to go into that because Southwick just uses the average ratings, but you can see, 61 and 61A, it's 119 an acre, productive woodland, 116 an acre, cropland, 215, veggies, tobacco, sod, nursery, about $1,000 an acre, dairy beef, forage, 215 an acre. So these are what you could expect to pay if you enrolled in the 61 programs. Went through that. So this is definitely where I would like Sue to present if possible. I can speak to this a little bit, but it's definitely not my area of expertise.
There's two Sues in the meeting. If you tell me which one, I can ask them to unmute.
Sue Gore,
Okay.
unless the other Sue wants to talk about right of first refusal.
Hi, how are you?
Hi.
All right, right of first refusal. Well, normally when we get a purchase and sale sent into us, that usually starts the process for us because we'll draw up the right of first refusal form, send it to the select board, and whatever meeting they happen to sign that in, you know, it'll go through its steps. As far as that, also the purchase and sale lets me know that I need to start doing a rollback if that's the case, to remove or forward whatever information I need to the owner. See if I can get my affidavit if they do want to continue on with the new purchaser, if they want to stay in the program. It's pretty basic. Yeah, right of first refusal is pretty, it is what it is. Normally they don't usually go 120 days. You might get it back a bit quicker from the select board, depending on the, like you said, the timing of the meetings. But it's either one of the two. Either you're gonna give me an affidavit along with all the, just keep it in, or we're just gonna remove it and do the 120 days.
Sue, while we have you on the line here, I'm sorry, I know that we've kind of covered right of first refusal already. So while we have you on the line, I was hoping we could just jump back to the other slide where Tina had pointed out that we use the average, I guess the average table there. Is there
Yeah.
a reason behind that, or can you talk a little bit more behind that as to why
That's-
Southwick uses the average versus below or above?
That's what we've had. I've never received any other differencing, noting the, and it's pretty even keel. Everybody's on the same page.
So what happens if I'm a farmer and I have part of my land that's considered below average soil? At
Then-
that point, what can I do about that? Like if I'm in 61A?
Well, if you have information and data, you can present that to our board, because the Board of Assessors is the ones that sign off on your application.
Gotcha. Okay, so there is that option. I just was
Yeah.
wondering. Okay, all right, just because we have had people come in recently and kind of educate AgCom on different soils within the same farmland. So there are definitely instances where people have less quote productive soil or soil that's just not as prime through big swaths of their land, and they're getting taxed the same as an average rate. So good to know that if they have the data, they can present that to the assessors.
Definitely address it to our board.
Thank you.
Sue, can you, I don't know if you can see the slides, but there's a couple more on the right of first refusal. Do you think you could speak at all to, I mean, has the town of Southwick ever exercised their option of right of first refusal, and or not? Could you speak to either of those scenarios?
Well, if any purchase and sale comes in to the town, they have to notify the land boards. And if anybody out there is going to purchase them, whether it's, if CPC has an interest, conservation usually goes through and they'll send out a notice saying, yes, there's funding that we're trying to get, or we have funding, we do want to purchase this, because there's two sign-offs that come back. If the select board isn't interested in purchasing it, they'll let that notice. But like I said, if there is another board that's interested, they can go ahead and start the process to purchase it. Most of the time, they pretty much know what properties they do wish. We had a meeting quite a while ago, and they went over the different properties in Southwick to see what ones they would love to try to purchase if it ever came up. And I think they're going through that yet again, and they're going to do it another review. and see if there's anything that they need to add to that list that had been created initially.
And is that a public process?
Yeah, I think pretty sure it was it was before all the online came about, but, and I'm sure, yeah, Dennis, I think, sat in it. There was quite a few different boards and different members, and everybody submitted whatever information they thought of the properties in Southwick that they would be desirable to purchase those.
And then the next slide is just about withdrawing from Chapter 61 programs early.
Haven't had that happen too much. Most of them have been in there for quite a long time, passed down. Most of the time when I do a rollback, it's basically the last 5 years. Haven't really run into that issue of people pulling it out, putting it in, and then pulling it right out.
And so when you have done the rollback, have you come into the issue of conveyance taxes versus rollback taxes?
Yeah, it's mainly I've done was rollbacks. Very rarely. They'll pull out a few if they need to change use, or if they want to slice off just a small bit of it for some monies to get them through whatever their adventures are. Rarely do we have an early pullout of that. Most of the people that have been in chapter land are very much long timers. They're in it to stay. And we've seen so many go into APR land. I think there's a few others that are looking at that for their future, but it takes a while, but it can be done.
Yep. that could be a conversation for another day.
Yeah, APR, you could do a whole little
Yeah.
seminar on that.
And then the slide is about conveyance taxes, but you kind of talked about that. And that's the end. Is there anything else anyone wants to note from their part of the presentation?
Yeah, I just have a few things I wanted to say. I met with a few landowners recently, and they were interested in the program, and they were ideal candidates. They had the acreage, their values were there, but there were just some misconceptions. They thought once they entered the forestry program that they would have to start cutting trees immediately. It's not like that at all. It really is kind of built around your goals. You do need to, the purpose is, managing for wood products, but trees grow at a slow rate. You're not growing corn or, other kind of annual agricultural products. So you might be in a situation where the first 10 years, you're focusing on maintaining your boundaries, establishing your boundaries, just kind of learning more about your property and kind of monitoring your forest health. And you could have, a very healthy forest that really, isn't ready yet for any type of management. But, the second, 10-year period, and especially the 30-year period, we definitely will be requiring some type of forestry. It could be, as light as, firewood thinning, for personal use, over that time. That's still good management if you're selecting the right trees, to thin out. So there's no pressure to, they thought they had to cut all, their trees down immediately. And that is not the intent of the program at all. So I hope no one thinks they have to, do something right off the bat. I think having a management plan helps because you're kind of prepared. There's always forest health issues happening. A lot of times it's insects or disease. But also it can be just wind events. I've seen microbursts, I've seen tornadoes up in Conway. These things happen. And I think if you have a management plan, you're kind of one step ahead of the game. You know your property, you know your resources. I think you're just in a better situation overall to manage those situations. So I think it's a good fit for those kind of landowners who, know they're going to own their land for a while. They want to manage it. They want to save money on taxes. And something else, you don't need to enter all of your forest land into the program. If you have 20 acres of land and maybe 5 acres you have for your house, driveway, a large yard, whatever, and you have 15 acres of forest land, and maybe you have plans in the future, maybe you want to convert some of that forest land to ag, or you just have other ideas in mind, you don't need to enroll all of those 15 acres into the program. You can just put 10 acres minimum in and exclude the rest. So it doesn't have to be an all or nothing approach in the program. And those are just some points, I wanted to make. People have questions.
Jacob, I had read somewhere that landowners can develop their own forest plan, even though the department recommends that people hire like a licensed forester. But you can develop one assuming that it meets all of the standards, right? For the 10-year management plans. But that being said, there is grant money to help offset the costs if you do decide to go through the more traditional route of hiring a forester, right? There may be some monies available to, or cost sharing monies to help landowners with the cost of that management plan.
Legally, landowners can prepare their own plan, but I really recommend working with a professional. They can do it so much faster, and they just know the steps so well. I haven't experienced that. I haven't gone through a plan with a landowner yet who prepared one for themselves, but I just know it's most of the times it's not complete. I think a lot of the measuring of your forest resources and just kind of the finer details of the requirements of the plan aren't always met initially. So, and your savings over the 10 years more than cover the initial cost of that 10-year plan. And it's usually just a one-time fee at the beginning, and you're set for 10 years. So I think it's worth the investment to just work with a licensed forester from the beginning. And then you have someone you can bounce questions and ideas off of throughout your process. I don't really know of anyone that charges, per telephone call or anything. They're pretty receptive to their clients. So I think it's nice to have an additional resource there available to kind of help you out and work with you. So.
And if people did want to look into options for cost sharing the costs of that forest plan, where would they go to figure out what funding opportunities there are?
I believe it can be found on the MassGov Service Forestry website. It might be listed under the Forest Stewardship Program. That's something we didn't get into. There are different levels of a management plan. They're usually more detailed. And usually there's cost share funding for those types of plans. I'll have to look into if there's any money available for just enrolling into the basic Chapter 61 Forest Management Plan. I'll have to look into that.
Thank you.
I have a couple of things. One is, can we get the presentation by email afterwards? And if so, would the presenters mind if I put that on the Southwick Agriculture Commission webpage?
It's fine. That's fine for me.
Yeah, hopefully help generate some interest, that way. The other thing with the rollback taxes, so we're basically saying that if you take your land out of chapter, you're going to pay all the back taxes plus, some interest that you would, taxes you would have paid if it were not in chapter.
Sue might be the best one to answer that, but it's the past 5 years.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, plus
It's
a
the-
5% simple fee. Yeah, Sue
It's right. So it's the difference that you would have paid total. So it's, just a minor adjustment.
but just for the last 5 years, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. But it seems, I mean, it seems like a big reduction in taxes. And so I'm just curious why somebody would take their land out of chapter, you know? You know. Anyway, so anyway, yeah, that's good. Thank you all, by the way, for this information. Very helpful.
You're welcome. And the Mass, you know, if you want to do more reading on your own, the Mass Woods website that Jacob mentioned has this really beautiful it's what I give people when they're curious about 61 programs, and it breaks it down in a way that makes a lot of sense. I mean, you can read the legislation, but sometimes
Right.
that just like kind of just washes over and you're like, what am I
Yeah.
reading? So
Yeah.
that booklet is the best one. And I have a couple notes from MDAR in particular. So spotted lanternfly, which is a pretty horrific pest in the mid-Atlantic region, has been found in Massachusetts. It's a really beautiful insect. So if you see it, you'll probably think to yourself, wow, that's really pretty. What is that? And it's a phloem feeder, and it sticks its, proboscis, probably saying that entomologically wrong, but into a plant, and just like straight through, like just sugar straight through its body, and then the ants come, and it's just like a big mess. In Pennsylvania, where it's a big problem, it's bad on hops and trees, and it's become a public nuisance because they're so dense, and they do this like pooping party, which just then draws ants, and people aren't really allowed. It's a pain. So if you see it, take a picture, send it to Department of Ag, but definitely take a picture, squash it, just let someone know that you've seen it. And the egg masses look a little bit like gypsy moth egg masses, but more like concrete colored. So definitely Google spotted lanternfly. It's something we don't want here in the state. Also, there's a really nice grant open right now called the Climate Smart Ag Program. I might be getting that acronym wrong. It's CSAP, and it's monies for energy efficiency projects or climate mitigation projects for your animals or crops. So if you want to dig a well, if you want to build a run-in shed to protect your cattle, if you want to put up solar panels, it's all about energy efficiency and climatic adjustments on the farm. And that's open until June 6th. So I would recommend checking that out. And then I mentioned this last time I talked to you guys, but it's official. The price per acre cap for price per acre for APRs is now $34,000 an acre. So that's the maximum people can get paid for their APR. The deadline for applying to become an APR is June, I want to say 30th, but it's in June. So if you're interested in becoming an APR, now is, or any time is the time to start thinking about it. But reach out to the department. You can contact me and I'll get you in touch with an acquisition person. But I thought the price per acre cap increase is definitely a good thing, and I think will help a lot of people. So those are my unrelated MDAR updates.
Thank you, Tina. We did have a question from Diane Gale. Diane?
So the question on the DLS land values, there's the 1,058 is the average harvested crop value. On the tax records and on our open land survey, I guess, our list of properties, there are segments of parcels that are listed as 720 non-productive. Does anybody know where those came from, how those are determined, and how I segregate property as non-productive for 61A? That was a lot of questions.
I'm gonna give that one to Sue.
As the person files their application, they're clarifying to us what the use is for that filing. And they'll review those applications. Some change crop, some change pasture, and they also do denote that when they apply for that, whatever fiscal year they're listing.
Who determines or who validates non-productive?
You're filing your application as whatever chapter that you're in.
Yep.
You're telling the Board of Assessors how you're going to work that land or what is not. If something's dormant, I don't know if they're resting it. I mean,
Okay.
you're clarifying to the Board of Assessors how that land is being worked.
Okay. So that can change year to year on a parcel.
Yes, we've seen people go from crop. Some people, like I said, leave it dormant. Some
Okay.
change it to pasture and so on.
Okay. So on that inventory of protected lands, there are some acreages listed as non-productive that the landowner hasn't filed as non-productive. But does anybody know the origin of that?
It's all how you file your application. You're telling and you're signing that there's a.
I'm not talking about the application, because the application that was filed in this particular case, it's all listed as productive land. But on the inventory of protected lands that was used for the Southwick Open Space Report, it has certain acreage designated as non-productive. And I'm wondering where that came, who determined that? Because it wasn't the landowner. They're not filing it that way.
You normally file every year, even if it's APR, they still should submit if I'm filing for an application, because it just clarifies, yes, I sold the development rights, but yes, I am continuing working and this is what I'm working it as.
Yes, yes, they do file that every year. However, they're filing it incorrectly because they're filing it 100% productive land. So they're doing it incorrectly. I'm trying to figure out how to file it correctly and to determine what that non-productive land is.
So
Is that just our assessment of it?
it still goes back to the application. You're saying that that's what you're clarifying it as.
But I think she's asking, if I'm not mistaken, Diane, you're trying to figure out who in that open space report where you saw the open inventory.
Yep.
You're trying to figure out who developed that inventory and how they ascertained the land usage.
Right. The non-productive land is on the DLS report stated as wetland, scrubland, rockland.
Right. Yep.
Primarily due to slope, drainage, soil type, or topography. So somebody has determined, and not just for my property, for many properties in town, what segment is non-productive due to slope, drainage, soil type, and topography. Who does that?
Yeah, I see what you're asking. You're trying to figure out if it's on the state side or is it someone in town who has done that?
Right. Is there a designation somewhere?
Right. This is separate from how you are filing for your
Correct.
own land, right? So you're
Correct.
seeing that discrepancy and you want to understand, right? Because then it seems like you're filing incorrectly as
Correct.
productive land when this report that you're seeing shows your land is non-productive. So who came up with that non-productive? Because it wasn't you guys.
Correct.
Gotcha. Okay. Does anyone here know the answer to that? I know we have Dennis Clark who helped with that open space plan and did some research.
If I had to guess where that data came from, I might think it came from Mass Mapper. Because there's all sorts of different layers you can pull up on that, like prime soil, slope, etc. So if
well, who would have gotten that information? I don't think anybody in town hall has access or even looks at that information. I've asked this question this is Dennis Clark. on the Ag Commission for quite a while, Conservation Commission Coordinator for 21 years. And I've been asking this question, and I also asked the question, Diane, I don't know if you noticed, they have undevelopable properties.
Yes.
Who decides that they're undevelopable? And if you look at that list, you'll see that some of the undevelopable properties have been developed already, and some of the properties that are considered developable aren't. So I'm not sure who actually does that research. I've never been able to find the answer to that either. So I believe that would be in the same category as non-productive, undevelopable. Who's making that determination?
That was one of my other questions.
I pulled up Mass Mapper, and I just want to show you guys. So this is where I think the data might be coming from. It's just a statewide search engine where you can put on different filters. So you can see open space, all owners, open space by ownership, or Department of Fish and Game lands. I think there's probably enough data here for someone to make those broad brush determinations.
Okay.
But if I saw the report, I could probably be more helpful. But this is a really good tool, and I'm guessing if you wanted to look at your land and say, like, I'll pick something not in Southwick for privacy purposes, but like if you wanted to look at your land and see how the soils are, how you wanted to categorize them, you could go to soils and prime farmland soils, turn on that layer. And so
Okay.
this is an APR and it's all prime, which makes sense. So that's kind of how you could take a stab at guessing your soil. But I mean, as I talk to farmers, people are like, yeah, it's classified as prime, but it really isn't as good as my soil over there, which isn't considered prime. So I don't know. I kind of take it with a grain of salt. I mean, I think I will give Southwick kudos for doing average, because I think it could be a slippery slope of someone who doesn't know anything about your soil upcharging you or something. I don't know. Average seems like a pretty reasonable valuation, unless you want to try and find some metric to prove otherwise. But yeah, if you send me the report, I could be more helpful in an answer.
Okay. Now this is a question again for Sue Gore. On open land, I believe the town is allocating 40,000 square feet for residential, even if there's none there. Is that correct?
If you're getting taxed for your building lot, we usually start out at that level, the 40,000.
Even if it's open land?
It's the way we base your building lot, that sizing. We had it at 60,000. We had done some adjustments with working with our DOR rep at the time. We adjusted it down to the 40.
Is that required by law?
It's my Department of Revenue rep that we worked with at the time of the change. And that's who we submit to.
The question is that building lot allocation required by law on open land?
That's what we use for valuation with our Department of Revenue guidelines. And that's how we adjusted it down to the 40,000. Obviously, depending on what zone you're in, you might need, 1.38 acres if you're in an R40 or versus your R20. But for valuation and assessments, that's why we made that adjustment to the 40,000.
Because it's required by law to have a building lot allocation? I'm not talking about how many square feet.
Neither am I. That's
the building lot required.
For values, for assessments, that's what we adjust it to go with our values.
That's the town's determination.
That's Department of Revenue. When we went through doing our valuations, we had an adjustments that we had to do for them for value, and that's we dropped it down to the 40,000 for the baseline for that lot, for the building lot.
All right, that's not answering my question, but let's move on. Okay, I guess that's my questions for now.
Any other questions for any of our guests? Tina, Jacob, Sue? All right. Well, I just want to say thank you very much to all three of you for your presentations and just for contributing to our understanding of how Chapter 61 works. We don't actually have a set procedure in place in Southwick, and it has led to some confusion, which is why we wanted to do this presentation so that the Agricultural Commission, which gets a lot of these questions from farmers in town and other landowners in town, is a little bit more educated. So this really does kind of set up the platform for us to hopefully pursue some sort of procedure in the near future, now that we understand a lot more about the program. So thank you so much for that. We may call on you guys in the future to educate us a little bit more as we go through the steps of formalizing that. Any last comments from anybody on AgCom? Before we
Just
say
to
goodbye?
echo the thank you and well done. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you so much for your time, all of you. And thank you to everybody who tuned in tonight.
Yes, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate the info.